Well, hello and welcome to the fourth section of the course. No readings this week. These are all death scenes from different films that I've watched over the years. Well, why am I giving these to you? Well, first of all, they're all great scenes. I mean, they're very, very different from each other, and that's bound to be instructive. It is that we have three different films, three different filmmakers who portrayed the dying process, the approach to death of these three different men in very different ways. It may be that, as we've seen, I think if you think about things like Epicurus and Plato, there's a very, I don't know if I included it in the actual excerpt, but there's a very telling remark that is not often noted in Plato's Phaedo, where Socrates, in talking about, he's trying to prove that the soul is immortal, that death is constituted by the separation of soul and body, and that while the body obviously decays, the soul is indestructible and goes on to an existence apart from the body. But he makes a remark, something like, well, am I sure of this? He says, well, as sure as one can be in matters such as this. And the matter such as this is death. And especially the speculations that we make about a continued existence after death. That is, it's very difficult for Plato or for Epicurus or for anyone to really make definitive statements, for any of us to make definitive statements about the nature of death. It seems, in a way, to be the thing about which we can maybe make no statements, either because death is nothingness, as I think Epicurus and perhaps Ecclesiastes, the author of Ecclesiastes, the preacher, the teacher, as he's called, would say. It may be that at the end of the day, we cannot say anything with much certainty about the nature of death. After all, if Epicurus is right, it's not something that any of us have actually experienced. It's unexperienceable, since it's the limit of life, not part of life. Or whatever, if Plato and the Bhagavad Gita and many other thinkers are correct, the kind of existence that the soul or mind or consciousness or spirit has after the death of the body is not one that we're privy to. So it may be that whatever our beliefs are at the end of the day, whatever our philosophy of death is, in the sense of what happens when we die, I don't think anybody really can be, except on the basis of one's faith, I suppose, be absolutely sure of any of that. So, but that is not to say that death is not familiar to us. But we can't think about death. We can't try to come to some understanding of death. But at the end of the day, it's not death that presents itself to us, is it? It's dying. That is, we observe people dying, and many of us will experience what we call dying. That is, even that's hard to really define. I mean, how would we define dying? I would say fairly loosely. That is the time in which death is imminent, the time in which the individual, perhaps, if he or she is lucky enough, I suppose, to be conscious and able to comprehend what's happening to them, that time in which one is aware that the end of one's existence is nigh. I'm not saying that, again, it's not that it's easy to define. For instance, one thing that's clear is that when we say that somebody's dying, that does not always mean that they soon will be dead. I mean, when we say somebody's dying, well, let's do something about it, right? Get them some oxygen or some water or some medical care that will save them. So dying doesn't always lead to death. It's a very strange thing. But in any case, many of us imagine maybe death is unimaginable, but many of us imagine the way we'll die, and that's what these three films are. They're filmmakers imagined deaths for their characters, and of their very different sorts, aren't they? And they reveal, I think, different attitudes. Perhaps not so much about death as about life. You know, the way that each one of these characters' deaths one supposes is in some way or another a reflection of the way that they've lived their lives. You have the one man in the French Canadian movie, the Barbarian Invasions, who dies in this. I mean, it's assisted suicide, no doubt, and one may have ethical qualms about that, but there's no doubt that the thing is presented in a very loving way, and that the man dies in what many would regard as a kind of an ideal way, surrounded by loved ones, um, and a feeling of love and peacefulness. The Magnolia death scene couldn't be any more different. Obviously, the great Jason Robards in one of his last roles, great American actor. I mean, it's just harrowing. Uh, that man's response to his own death, and his the way that it seemingly makes him view the way he's lived his life with sort of brutal clarity. And then finally, great death scene, extended death scene from the great film from the 70s, All That Jazz, great Bob Fosse film starring the great Roy Scheider, another wonderful American actor. Imagining death as the sort of the final act, the final show, the final number. The man there is really a stand-in for Bob Fosse himself, who was a film director, but also very, very important choreographer for many movies and Broadway shows. Transitioned into film direction. Great American film director Bob Fosse. Other films, if you have a chance to see them, just really, it's a great director. Three different views of the way that we die, and they are just imagined views. I mean, one of the things I like to think about myself when I watch films like death scenes in films is what's more truthful. You know how will how closely do these things come to the way that people actually do die or approach death? Of course, that question is a silly question. It's more truthful to what? I suppose. I guess it comes down to which one kind of appeals to you. Which one do you think, for yourself, expresses, artistically in film, the truth of how we die? But of course, that's entirely up to you. I have my own thoughts on that, but so what? I mean, the important thing is that you look at these three clips that I think are really great and are from great films. Each of them is freely available, and sort of what do you think?